I invite you to rise in body or spirit for the reading of the gospel. Or rise and sit back down, however the Spirit moves you, that's fine. The Holy Gospel today comes from John, the 6th chapter, verses 24 through 35. So when the crowd saw that neither Jesus nor his disciples were there, they themselves got into the boats and went to Capernaum looking for Jesus. And when they found him on the other side of the sea, they said to him, "Rabbi, when did you come here?" And Jesus answered them, "Very truly, I tell you, you are looking for me not because you saw signs, but because you ate your fill of the loaves. Do not work for the food that perishes, but for the food that endures for eternal life, which the Son of Man will give you. For it is on him that God the Father has set his seal." Then the people said to him, "What must we do to perform the works of God?" And Jesus answered them, "This is the work of God, that you believe in him whom God has sent." So they said to Jesus, "What sign are you going to give us then, so that we may see it and believe you? What works are you performing? Our ancestors ate the manna in the wilderness. As it is written, he gave them bread from heaven to eat." Then Jesus said to them, "Very truly, I tell you, it was not Moses who gave you the bread from heaven, but it is my Father who gives you the true bread from heaven. For the bread of God is that which comes down from heaven and gives life to the world." And they said to him, "Sir, give us this bread always." And Jesus said to them, "I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never be hungry, and whoever believes in me will never be thirsty." This is the gospel of the Lord. Thanks be to God. I invite you to be seated. The people of God from the beginning of time have always been concerned about there being enough. The text for this Sunday from the Hebrew Bible tells the story of the Israelites' fear and frustration that there wasn't enough food for them to eat. And a lot of people give the Israelites a really hard time for their complaining. They paint them as some kind of impatient passengers on like the longest road trip ever who wanted to stop at the Buc-ee's in Madisonville, but instead they have to wait until they get to almost Dallas, and they're just complaining and nothing can make them happy. But let's be real, y'all. Let's remember where they came from. These people were going through something that we can barely even imagine. This particular passage from Exodus that's assigned for this Sunday talks about the Israelites complaining over and over and over and over again. Like, seriously, the word complaining or complaint is used about a dozen times. But what if we had a little more grace or compassion towards these people and their situation? I wonder if, using the teachings of Brene Brown, if any of you are familiar with her, I got a woo somewhere. I wonder if we offered our most gracious and generous interpretation of their behavior, what we would find. And I think what we'd find is that the Israelites weren't just whining for the sake of whining, but y'all, they were scared. They were scared and uncertain about what lay ahead of them. They've just come from Egypt. They fled Egypt. This wasn't a leisurely road trip. They fled from Egypt, where they were literally enslaved by Pharaoh. And they suffered greatly under the rules and laws of the land that considered them less than human at best. And now their journey has already been so long, and there seems to be no end in sight. And y'all, they're scared. They're scared. What are they going to eat? Will it be enough? Remember back when there was enough to eat? What now? And in a similar way, I think that the people and the crowds from the gospel today are also scared. Just before our gospel reading, Jesus does a really miraculous thing. That's why you got to drink coffee before the service, y'all. Jesus has just fed 5,000 men, plus or minus a few thousand women and children, because of course women and children weren't officially counted in the numbers that got written down in the Bible. But he's just fed all of these people with nothing more than a few meals worth of bread and fish. There was no Costco run, right? There was no bulk order. There was no Subway tray of sandwiches or 50,000 that got brought in. He did a miraculous thing. And maybe for the first time in a long time or ever, I wonder if these people are wondering if their worries about where their daily bread will come from might be over. Because where these people lived and the way things worked under the Roman Empire, they depended on the empire for their daily rations of bread, and there were all of these rules, and you could only get it at a certain time from a certain place, and it was all dependent on your class and your status. And in the Roman Empire, it was only the top 2 or 3% of the population that had free access to basically anything that they would want. So I wonder, these people in the crowd who have just witnessed the feeding of the 5,000, I wonder if they're like, hey, that Jesus guy might be the answer to our bread problems. And so they frantically follow Jesus and they ask him how they can ensure that this kind of thing keeps happening. How can they make sure that they will always have access to bread? And when Jesus tells them they need not seek physical bread, but instead they should seek wholeness and fulfillment from God, they say, great! And how do we do that? And this is where Jesus takes a deep breath and looks at the crowd lovingly and says, it's nothing you have to do. Just believe. And the crowd's like, okay, all right. But what do we need to do to earn your support and make sure that we stay on your good side and make sure that we're believing enough? And Jesus was like, it's really not how it works. You don't have to do anything. Just take me for what I am and believe that I was sent by God for you. I'll never give you up. I'll never let you down. I'm never going to run around and desert you. Jesus says, you don't have to walk around on eggshells with me or with my Father who sent me. We're not like the emperor or his soldiers. Because with us, you will always be known, cherished, and loved. You'll always have what you need. And that message remains the same for us today in a world where it often feels so hard to measure up, or where the fear of not enough traps us. Jesus, the bread of life, remains with us, providing not just for immediate needs or hunger, but reminding us that we are children of God, considered whole and worthy and beloved just as we are. Through Jesus Christ, the bread of life, we are freed from the burden of trying to be enough because we are already enough. And even more, to God who created us in their image in the beginning and called us very good. And if you want the receipts, it's Genesis chapter 1, verse 31. God saw everything that they had made, and indeed it was very good. We, as we are right now, are enough, are more than enough. And Jesus promises enough even when we feel like we don't measure up. Jesus promises enough even when we've really, 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 really messed up. And I'm not just talking about moving the slides on time. Jesus promises enough even when the world says otherwise. And we're called to share the good news of enough with everyone. We're called to advocate and to act for those who are hungry or sick or without shelter, because we, each of us sitting here right now and watching online and whoever else may hear this, we are the embodied reminders that God, through Jesus, promises enough. Promises enough. And that means we have to look at ourselves and look at the gifts that we have and look around at our neighbors and what their needs are. Because there is enough for everyone if we share it. If we share the gifts that God has first given us. That's why the partnership that you all have with Montrose Grace Place is so huge. Because you, as a church, as people of God, are recognizing the gifts and the skills and the talents and the time that you have, and you are sharing that with your neighbors, even though they're like 30-something miles away in Montrose. I know people out in Cyprus are like, oh, Houston. You're sharing what you have so that others may have enough, so that they too may know that they are cherished and known and whole and beloved and enough as they are, even when the world has made it so that they don't feel like they have enough, or that they aren't good enough, or that they are less than. God, through Jesus, promises enough. Jesus is the bread of God, which came down from heaven and is here at this table and among each of us, not just as a snack during worship, but to give life to us, to remind us of the bread of God that sustains us and propels us forward. The bread of life is God's constant and steady refrain of enough and beloved towards us in all of creation. The bread of life is what sustains us and propels us towards love and service of our neighbor. Jesus, the bread of life, welcomes us into a new way of life, where we're freed from the burdens of sin and doubt, of wondering if we measure up, if we're enough. We're freed from those burdens because Jesus invites us to the table, to partake in the feast that never ends, with the communion of all the saints, and the blessings spoken at the table is the simple refrain and promise: enough. Amen.